The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André, Madman André, if you will, and I'm your host. Thought I'd give myself a little name today. I don't particularly care for it, but maybe you will. And this is the show. Big thanks to U.N.C.L.E. the Mock, our guest from 2 weeks ago, for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, listener, for tuning in to another great episode. I must say, I had a great time with today's guest. Today's guest being Canadian comics trailblazer, Ronn Sutton. I gotta thank Jeff Ursherwood, a previous guest on the show as well, for making the introduction so that I could speak to Ron, and I had a great conversation. I mean, I love talking to these Canadian creators that have been here for quite a while, trailblazing the Canadian comics industry, and I know it's been a hard go for a lot of them, but they're out there making a name for themselves and doing some insanely great quality work. And Ron had quite a career in a lot of different comics, a lot of different sort of fields. And we get into that. His time as a sketch artist for the court system, it was quite interesting. And some of his early convention visits and some of the huge names in the industry that he got to meet through conventions early on and became friends with, it kind of was flooring to me that you could just become friends with your idol that easily back in the day. And I know it's probably for the best you can't, but, guys like Ron, who are top-notch people that probably met these creators, made them feel good about their work and helped them in a lot of different ways. We're out there doing it, and I'm amazed that they could and did. And Ron had some great stories about some idols of mine that were idols of his back then as well, that he got to meet, become friends with, and work with, and it's amazing. Ron is a great guy, top-notch guest. Very happy to have him on the show, and I really enjoyed our talk. It was a lot of fun, and you'll get to hear that very soon. On the normal front for me, what's going on in the world, I did manage to go see The Batman. And I must say, it's pretty good. I really liked it. I don't need to give you a deep, entailed review. I'm sure you've probably seen it if you are a nerd that listens to this podcast. And if you haven't, well, it's great. I mean, if you love your dark Batman, you're going to get it. And if you don't want to see the Waynes get gunned down again, you don't have to. They kind of gloss over the origin story of Batman, which is great because at this point, you don't really need it. I mean, you know the deal. They got killed. He swore justice, and that's it. And it reminded me a lot of the Arkham Asylum games, the costume specifically, which I wasn't 100% sold on, but kind of grew on me as I watched the movie. Their version of the Riddler is quite different than the one I'm familiar with. I have always loved the Riddler. He's been my favorite Batman villain forever. Specifically, his depiction in the animated series as this sort of bowler hat wearing, well dressed, super smarmy, intelligent guy. And this character doesn't really do that. And maybe, the director has described these movies, or this movie specifically, as being kind of an origin story of some of Batman's villains. And it is that, in a way. And maybe it will progress to that. I don't know. Paul Dano's a great actor, and what he does with the character is very interesting. I do really enjoy that they made it, a detective story. So you kind of get to see Batman being a detective and solving riddles and crimes and getting to the heart of a mystery, which is something we haven't really seen much in the Batman films before. So I'm very excited to see that version of the Caped Crusader and see what they do with it. It's got great 90s-based soundtrack. It's got the super dark cinematography. Colin Farrell's Penguin is superb, in my opinion. Really, I always thought it was interesting that they went that route to, layer him under all this makeup to make him the Penguin, but he does a really good job. And there's one scene in particular that made me laugh in the theater quite loudly that I won't reveal. But, if it's subtle, but it's funny. And if you appreciate that sort of humor as I do, you will enjoy it too. But yeah, it was very good. And I'm excited to see what comes next. It did gangbusters for box office, so I'm sure there'll be more coming down the pipe. Also this week is the new Obi-Wan show trailer has dropped from Disney Plus, and it looks awesome. As a big fan of the Jedi Fallen Order game for the PlayStation, I must say elements of that are working their way into this, specifically the Sith Inquisitors, which are cool characters. I'm very excited to see what they're going to do with that in the live-action forum. I know timeline-wise, the character from that game, Cal Kestis, could also make an appearance, and that actor is around, so that would be really cool if that happens. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but I got a lot of time for Star Wars. A lot of time. I often joke that they could make a Jar Jar Binks TV show, and I'd probably watch and enjoy it. I do think I can analyze it with a critical eye, but I do think it gets a little bit of leeway from me since it's something I've enjoyed so much for my entire life. Same with Spider-Man movies. I tend to apologize for those more than I should. I do actually think Spider-Man 3, the original one with the Tobey Maguire series, was actually a decent movie. It was like a bombastic 90s comic book to me, which was fun. I guess a kid that grew up with the Clone Saga and all that sort of stuff happening in my developmental years put something in my brain that kind of enjoyed this sort of crazy balls to the wall, don't take a breath, throw everything at the kitchen sink at you kind of comics, which happened every once in a while, and actually quite a bit of that time period. So that movie kind of reminded me of it. So, I apologize for it. I don't apologize for it, but I do enjoy that movie, and a lot of people don't. I can totally understand why, but I still do. So that being said, even if you are analyzing this with a deeply critical eye, it does look like it's going to be a really, really cool show. I mean, Ewan McGregor's a great actor. He's one of the best parts of the prequel trilogy by far. And I'm excited to see Hayden Christensen reprising Darth Vader's role. I think that'd be a nice return for him and something interesting, as I hadn't seen him in film in a while. Maybe I'm just not watching the correct films, but it seems like he's been laying low for a while. So I'm excited to see him return to the franchise and see what they're going to do with it. But enough of my nerddom ramblings about all the things I saw and liked this past week. Why don't we sit down and talk with Ronn Sutton? As I mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed this conversation. Ronn's a super interesting guy with a detailed history in Canadian comics, and it was a great conversation. I can't thank him enough for giving his time to me and to the show, and to you, gentle listener, to let you in on his world and the amazing work he is doing. So without any further ado, let's speak with Canadian comic creator Ronn Sutton.
Hello.
Hey, Ron, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for joining me. You got it all figured out?
I think so. It took me a while. I'm not very good at these things, for sure.
No, technology's not your bag?
Not at all.
No. Well, kudos to you in 2 years of, everyone talking on Zoom to not have had to figure it out. Because honestly, I've gotten pretty tired of it after, I love doing it for the interviews and stuff, but like these sort of social gatherings people used to do where we'd all just sit on Zoom and talk to each other got pretty old for me pretty fast.
Yeah, well, Janet's the one that does all the computer stuff, and I mean, she's has a full-time job with the government, and she's doing Zoom meetings all day long with different parties, so she knows all about all this stuff, and I know nothing about it. So
will she get to work from home, I assume, with all this since?
Yeah, that's it. So
awesome. Oh, great. Yeah, I have some friends that work for the government as well, and she's similar boat. She was living in Ottawa and then ended up moving back here. I'm in Nova Scotia.
Oh, right.
Ended up moving back here to be with her folks for a bit, and her and her family all moved in, and she just does everything telecommutely now. So if anything good has come from this, it's that we've all realized that our being in an office isn't as important as people used to think it was.
Apparently. It's baffling to me because, as I like to point out to people, I mean, I make my living with a pencil. I mean, how much more basic can you get?
That's true. And you've been doing it for a very long time.
A very, very long time, for sure.
Awesome. I'm always excited to talk to people that like Canadians that have been making a career in comics for as long, like Jeff and yourself and a few others I've spoken with as well, that like Mark Shane Bloom and oh God, I'm blanking for a minute on some of the other people I talked to, but some of those guys, like it's always an honor to be able to talk to them. So I'm really happy you could come and join me.
Well, it's neat. It's good to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. So where you are in Ottawa right now?
Ottawa, yeah. I'm from Toronto originally, but I've been here in Ottawa about 30 years now. So
what part of Toronto?
Well, all over the place. I mean, I was born and raised in Downsview, one of the suburbs, but I mean, as an adult, I always lived, in the downtown core somewhere. So,
Yeah. What did your folks do?
my father was a police officer. Both my parents are gone now. My father was a police officer. He was on the police force, and for the largest portion of his career, he was actually on the horses. He was riding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, riding
Cool.
horses daily. Yeah, he had mixed feelings about it. It was he thought the horses were pretty dumb, to tell you the truth. It's nice to go and see horses somewhere and go and ride them or pat them, but it's another thing when you're dealing with them all day long, every day.
That's interesting, because I would have assumed you would have had to volunteer for a position like that. I didn't assume they'd just be like, okay, you're a mounted officer now, and you just have to roll with it. Like, that sounds like quite an adjustment.
Yeah, well, he did everything. I mean, he started out walking a beat, and then he was, on a motorcycle for a while. Then he was on patrol cars, and he applied to get on the mounted unit. And as I say, the vast majority of his career was on the mounted unit. So a lot of it was public relations. I mean, he used to have a uniform, black and red with a white helmet that he used to sit in front of City Hall, and that was kind of a thing for the tourists. And good public relations. And,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah. So, and my mother was mostly a housewife. She had different occupations at different times, but yeah, mostly a housewife. So,
Do you only child or brother, sisters?
no, brother and sister, both younger. So,
Oh, really?
I was the rebel of the family. There's no question about that. So.
Because you went into art?
I was just the rebel to begin with, and the fact that I went into art, I mean, all my relatives were all sort of in the police or sort of blue collar work, so nobody knew anything about art. Nobody between all my relatives owned one art book, so I was kind of lost and had to find my own way.
Were you kind of the, how they say, like, the kids of cops and of, clergy and stuff generally tend to act out? Would you say that was your MO, or?
Yeah, well, my father and I truly did not get along for most of our lives, unfortunately. So we were coming every possible topic. We were coming from opposite directions. So, anyway.
I can understand that. My dad is, I get along with him quite well now, but when I was a kid, I just didn't. He's like the hardworking carpentry type, and I was I just want to, like, work in the woods and make a man out of you kind of thing. Well, I'm like, I want to, draw comics and watch, nerdy cartoons. We never really ever understood it. But, it's funny when you get older, you kind of see things in your personality that remind you of them that you never would have expected. Like
Sure.
It's me and him have the exact same sense of humor, which I think is hilarious, considering just like a super dark sense of humor. But yeah, but I definitely got it from him. I don't know what, like, definitely didn't get it from mom. So. That's cool. So as a kid, what was growing up in Toronto like? Was art, like comics, something you were into right from the get-go, or is that something that came
I mean, I've said this to other people. I mean, I remember that when I was really, really young, a real toddler, my father used to read me Donald Duck comics, in bed before, I went to sleep at night sometimes. But I mean, I was just like every other kid. I was like, buying kids, and they were buying comics, and they were just disposable. It's like you read it and, throw it away or trade it or fold it up or whatever. And I guess what finally sort of made me sit up and pay more attention and start becoming a collector was when Marvel was being run by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and they were doing all those books, Thor and Fantastic Four and what have you. And Stranko was doing comics, and Ditko and Don Heck and all those guys. I mean, I didn't have enough money to buy everything that they were putting out. I was a rabid fan. There's no question about it. But eventually within a number of years, I started switching over from, being a fan of the titles or the companies, being a Marvel fan, to just being interested in the artists. And so then I started, discovering the works of people like, Gray Morrow for one, and a number of other comic artists whose work I started following. So if Gray Morrow drew issue number 1 and number 3 of some title, I wouldn't buy number 2, which is the way I am now with comics. I just follow artists around. So by about 1970, though, I was following artists, and I was no longer interested in superhero comics. I'd already, moved over to horror comics and science fiction and westerns and romance comics and everything else, horror comics.
So you were around in the heyday of the horror comics when they were like before the comics code, where they could kind of do what they wanted and go nuts.
No, because that was the 1950s.
Right. Yeah. No,
they were coming out, EC and all those people, but I never saw any of those comics. I don't know whether I didn't see them or they weren't being distributed in Toronto or what the deal was. But of course, EC was, middle of 1950, so I would have been, probably way too young, yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. So was it always art from you just from the get-go before you started noticing artists specifically? Like, was the writing ever as big an issue with you? Is it mostly just the art you followed?
Well, it was when I discovered, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, it was an interesting thing at that time. From the editorials and everything else, you felt like Stan Lee was your friend, your personal friend, and I love those books. I bought some of the Essentials a number of years back and reread, all the Fantastic Fours again, and went, man, that's really good stuff,
Yeah.
But like I say, by about 1970, I had sort of switched over to all these non-superhero books, and I was more interested in the art, and I was starting to meet some artists. The two most significant people I met was, first of all, I met Bill Payne, who most people don't know the name of, but he was a Toronto artist, although he was originally from the States, and he drew a daily newspaper strip that went through the Toronto Telegram Syndicate that was called The Giants, and it was a daily Canadian history strip. It started out as Canadian history, and then eventually became world history, and they would do stories about the suffragettes and the origins of Scotland Yard and all sorts of things like that. And Bill Payne's drawing was just unbelievable. He ranks right up there with Leonard Starr and, some of the really greats, but he was very unknown, and his work wasn't well distributed, and Bill really didn't ever promote himself in any way. And eventually he got into radio, and I started pushing him to start submitting his work to DC. So he started doing a whole lot of mystery stories for House of Mystery and Witching Hour, stuff like that. And some of the war stories and stuff. And again, all non-superhero stuff. And he was doing that stuff and a little bit for Skywald and a couple other publishers. And then he drifted into animation. And unfortunately, the last time I saw him was about 30 years ago, I think now, unfortunately. We were really good friends at one point, and I certainly learned a lot from him.
How would you have connected with him? Like, this is before conventions and stuff were really a thing, were they?
Yeah, I was trying to arrange a convention, actually, and I was looking at the Toronto Telegram, looking at the comic strips, and I was looking at the Giants, and I realized it was Toronto Telegram Syndicate. So I phoned the Toronto Telegram. I don't know, I was like 14 or 15, something like that. I wasn't about to get no for an answer. So they put me in touch with Bill, although I had to be persistent. And then I started going to visit him on a regular basis. And I was trying to arrange a convention, which never happened. Although by 1972, I did do a convention, but
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is this like one of the early Toronto ones? Like, what was the convention called?
This was the Toronto one. It was 1972, March 1972, March 3rd to 5th, I think it was. It was Cosmicon. It was held at York University. There was a guy named Ken Ketter who was a student there, film student, and he was trying to get this convention off the ground. And I think it was for March break, and I think it was a fundraiser was the concept. And so I went up and saw him and talked to him. And as it was getting closer to the date of the convention, I started realizing that, you know, with his school activities, his school commitments, he was going to have a real problem getting this convention going. So I ended up moving into York University and into the residence, and got on the phone and started inviting our guests. So ultimately what we had was we had a 3-day convention. I got Jim Steranko to do the poster for the convention. And Bill Payne actually did a secondary poster as well. And our guests included Stan Lee, Joe Kubert, James
Oh
Warren,
my God.
Alan Weiss, Howard Chaykin, Michael Kaluta, Steranko. There was a whole pile of people. The French film director, Alan Rene.
Oh my God.
We
Wow.
had all-night 16 millimeter movies running. We had a banquet for all the guests, and the whole thing was finished off. Oh, we had 7 art rooms on
Wow.
display.
You're describing heaven to me right now, Ron.
One of the rooms actually was dedicated strictly to Steranko's paintings for pocketbook
Oh my
covers.
God.
And then
You were 20 when you did this. This is 72, you said?
70, yeah, I was 19 actually at that point.
Wow. And you were going to York University, I assume?
No, I was just
No.
living there at the time.
You could just rent a
I just
residence. Oh,
moved
amazing.
in. Well, Ken was so busy, with his school activities that I just took over, and it's like I got on the phone and started phoning people.
Wow. It's mind-boggling to me that, like, because this is obviously way pre-internet, you couldn't just send someone an email or talk to their agent. Like, you would really track down numbers and get in touch with people hand in hand to do this.
Well, it was pretty easy because most of them were in the phone book.
Mm.
I was going to say though, the capper for the whole convention was we had at the end of the convention, we had an ear-splitting live concert by Ted Nugent.
Wow.
That was interesting too, because he was from Detroit, and
Yeah.
Ken Ketter, he had 2 things he absolutely insisted on. He absolutely insisted Jim Warren had to be one of the guests, and he absolutely insisted we had to have Ted Nugent. So I was like, fine, no problem.
Really? That's quite a specific ask.
Yeah.
Wow. Nugent's a madman. His politics have painted him into a fairly right-wing corner at this point in his life. But back then, he was such a powerhouse as a performer. That's crazy.
Absolutely. But he was from Detroit, so he and the band, they literally packed up their equipment and drove to the convention and did their concert, and then packed up their equipment and drove back again.
Jeez.
The funniest part is I had to go pay him at the end of the concert.
Yeah.
We're paying him in cash, and I'm not sure how much the money was, but I ended up having a conversation with 100% nude Ted Nugent because he was getting dressed, and it didn't seem to bother him. So,
wow, that's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah,
so were you trying to draw at this point? Like, were you start drawing as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I had already done a lot of artwork for fanzines and amateur publications and things. In fact, the week prior to a week or 2 prior to the convention, I actually had my first strip ever published, and it was a 3-page thing I had written and drawn that appeared in the Seer, which was one of the York University newspapers. Mm-hmm. So, but prior to that, I'd had a lot of artwork in different U.S. fanzines and things like that. And I'd actually briefly published my own fanzine in Mimeo and Ditto way back when. So.
Oh wow! Like, your career is like it's almost every avenue. It's almost like every avenue that everyone has gone to get into art, but you've done it all. Like,
true.
That's amazing. True, wow, that's super cool. So
that was significant. And then I was saying, the other person that was artist I met that was significant was Bernie Wrightson.
Oh my God, that's a legend.
1970, I went to my first convention ever, which was the Detroit Triple Fanfare. And the only reason I went to the convention, the specific reason I went, was to meet Bernie and become friends with him. And so the mission was accomplished. I followed him around all weekend, telling him what a genius he was, and he liked me.
Yeah.
So we became friends. And then by later in 1972, I actually moved down to Saugerties, New York, which is where he lived, and slept on his living room couch for about a month and a half or 2 months.
Oh, wow.
And Jeff Jones, the painter Jeff Jones, lived about 10 miles away, and Jeff was another one of my idols. So I used to spend a lot of weekends with Jeff. Jeff had a house that he was sharing with Vaughn Baudet. And whenever Vaughn would go away for the weekend, I'd go over and spend the weekend at Jeff's place. And I ended up actually modeling for a whole lot of comics that he did, and a couple paintings as well. And
oh my God, this is amazing.
I adored that guy. I thought he was exactly what an artist should be.
Yeah, just a little loopy, but off to the.
I wouldn't say loopy. He was very different for sure. He had his own way of looking at things, and just a tremendous talent. So,
That's
So
amazing.
he was, those two guys were huge inspirations to me. And then I'd go into New York City and spend a lot of time with Michael Kaluta, who I already knew as well. And there's another person that, I'm still in touch. I'm glad to still be in touch with. I was in touch with Bernie right up until his death, so.
Oh wow, that's amazing that you could like. It's amazing to me that you could just go hang out at a convention, find your hero, and become friends with them. Like I feel like the days of that happening are pretty far away now.
Yeah, I think so.
There's mountains of people, and also there's so many people now at these conventions. It's. I feel like making those sort of closer connections with fans probably isn't quite as easy as it used to be.
Yeah,
but, right,
it was a different time then. I mean, Bernie his career was only going a few years at that point, but I bought everything I could find by him. I just loved his stuff. So I mean,
yeah, I have quite a few collections of his horror work, like the hardcovers, and I just flipping through it floors me every time.
Oh, absolutely.
He's such a master. He was one like of all those horror writers. Artists, like him and Wally Wood and some of the other ones are ones that always rise to the top to me. But man, he's
absolutely.
And Corbin, but he's one of the best, like by far one of the best. Wow, it's amazing. Cool. That's amazing. You get to spend so much time with him. So what was he like generally? Was like, because horror was his bag as far as a lot of the art that he did. Was that like a choice on his, or just sort of a box that he got painted into?
Oh no, that was
his thing.
Sure, yeah. I mean, he just loved horror stuff. I mean, if you went to the movies with Bernie, you'd go and see something like the blood spattered bride. I mean, you were out seeing art movies.
Well, as someone who's a fan of those type of movies, I can totally. I think they're art in their own way.
Oh, absolutely.
I have a couple friends. We usually get together and watch a lot of old, like Herschel Gordon Lewis, or just old movies like that we can get our hands on to watch. So it's lovely stuff. That's fantastic.
Yeah, the first time I ever read any EC comics was when I was staying with Bernie, because he had a nice little stack of them, of course, and they were impossible to find back then, and nothing had been reprinted at that point, and I'd only heard of them prior to that. So
have you I'm not sure how much like you collect as far as graphics novels go now, but have you seen the hardcover collections they're putting out now with they'll pick one of those artists from all the EC comics, like, and not just horror, they're like their war comics and the other ones, and they'll compile them all into one.
The Fantagraphics ones.
Yeah, I have quite a few of them now.
I've got the Williamson one, and I've got the first Wally Wood one, I think.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really cool to see those sort of collections come together.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, that's amazing. So what was the next step beyond this? You were starting to do the art, you did the convention. Like when did you get to comics initially? You worked on some of Chaykin stuff for DC. Was that like a connection you made through the convention, or?
No, that was through Bernie, actually, because he and Bernie were friends. And so when I arrived at Wrightson's place, he pulled out this envelope and he goes, "Here," and he hands me all these pages and goes, "Ink this." And I went, "What's this all about?" And it was the third issue of Sword of Sorcery featuring Fafford and the Grey Mouser, put out by DC. And so he said he had taken the assignment, but it was for me to ink it, and then at the end he'd go through and finish it up.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up inking. Probably I was really slow. I mean, I was really unsure of myself. I was really slow. So I ended up inking, I don't know, maybe about half the issue. And then Chaykin, when he saw what I was doing, he handed me some blank pages and said, "Here, draw these 4 pages," because I haven't drawn them yet. So I penciled 4 pages that were in that same issue, and they were inked by 2 of them were inked by Dan Green, and the other 2 were inked by Walt Simonson.
Oh my God!
They told me the 2 of them in an hour and a half with a magic marker, because the deadline was just so completely blown by that point. But I did manage to hide my initials on the last page. There's a sword being thrown at a harpy, and if you look closely, my initials are in the handle of the sword, because I knew I wasn't going to get any credit. So
yeah, wow.
So I did that, and then I came back to Toronto, and I started doing some stuff for Orb magazine, which was the early black and white newsstand Canadian magazine, comic book. And then I started doing some stuff for Baka magazine, which was published by Baka Books, a science fiction bookstore. I started doing little strips all over the place. And then I started doing a lot of magazine illustration for the Canadian and Maclean's magazine and Toronto Life and Canadian Business and Business Journal and just on and on and on.
So those things you had to apply to, or like, I assume they probably weren't headhunting cartoonists or artists for those sort of projects.
No, well, there was illustration, not cartoons, and I just take my portfolio up, and that's, again, talk about the differences. That's back in the days when you would just make an appointment with the art director and go up and show them your stuff. By the time I sort of stopped doing magazine illustrations, you'd call a magazine and you'd go up there and leave your portfolio and then come back the next day and pick it up from the receptionist. So you would never meet anybody except the receptionist.
Yeah.
I did hundreds of those magazine illustrations. I did the front cover of Maclean's for one issue as well. And so I did a lot of that. And then I moved up here to Ottawa about 1992. And that's when I started getting back into doing more comics again and started doing a whole lot of female vampire comics, which eventually led to Elvira, which I drew Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, for 9 years.
So I wanted to expand on that if we could for a bit, because I'm a fan of obviously her whole thing and the movies and also the hosting she used to do for the horror movie series and stuff.
Right.
Because at that point, what year would that have been?
It was 1997. I did them from 1997 to 2006.
So how did that come about? Was that something you applied for, or just through your comic work you were? I was mailing out samples, randomly sending samples to companies and getting form letters or getting nothing in response. And Richard Howell, who was running Claypool, made the mistake of personally writing me back and saying, "Dear Ron, I like your stuff, but we haven't got any, work for you. Maybe you should try your bigger company." And him giving me the brush off, but doing it personally, I took as a sign to send more samples. So not to be deterred. Well, it's nice. I mean, I think that the kid that wouldn't take no for an answer for a convention, obviously grew too dull that still kept that through line.
That's it, exactly. That's so
fantastic. It sounds like even not picking, zeroing in on them really paid off. I mean, you worked on that series for how long? You say 30 years?
9, almost. It felt like 9 years. Yeah,
9 years.
I drew almost 50 stories for them.
That's what it was. 50 stories. Sorry. Yeah.
So, it was. Yeah, so I just sent him more samples, and the next thing I know, he contacted me again. So I've got a story for you to draw. So I went, great. So I drew it, and I said, "What's the chance of getting another one?" And he went, "Oh, fine, sure." So, and from that on, they just kept coming. So as soon as I'd finished one, he'd give me another script.
So did you ever meet Peterson? Cassandra Peterson, yeah.
Many times, actually.
Yeah.
Many times. The first time I met her was actually at San Diego Comic-Con, and I knew I was going to meet her. It'd sort of been prearranged. So I took the very first page I'd ever drawn of Elvira, which was a story called The Legend of Elvira. It was about a Mexican bandito, and it was a nice big full page one. So I took it with me and I got her to sign it. She wrote on it, "To Ron, thanks for everything. Thanks for making me look so good. Love, Elvira." And of course, the way she signs original artwork is the same way she signs black and white glossies, which she just covers the whole thing.
I was going to say it's probably not quite as meticulous as an artist is to try to.
No, it's not. The artists, they sign like a little blank space somewhere, and she was just like all over the whole thing. So that's fine. I've actually got framed here in my studio the very first page I drew and the very last page I drew of Elvira framed side by side.
So when doing that series, were you already aware of who she was, like at that point?
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan. I mean, I knew who she was, but I didn't have a TV, so I hadn't seen the Midnight Macabre or whatever the TV show was called. But and you were saying about having met her. So I've actually met her, I don't know, maybe a half dozen to a dozen times at this point. It was the best time actually was at the Montreal Comic-Con one year. They actually set us up. Our table butted up right next to hers.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, people were probably getting comics signed by you and her, obviously. So
that's it. So that was nice. Yeah.
Well, it's she was always kind of an inspiration as far as nerddom goes, and especially in later years, like when she recently sort of came out of the closet, I guess.
Right.
And I was reading some articles about, just sort of the fandom that she had to answer to. Not that she has to answer to anybody, but just like some of the old fanboys back in the day that were, that were angry that, saying she misrepresented herself as something. Because and I thought she had some really great responses to that sort of talk, and I imagine being at those sort of tables because she sort of became an idol, the horror icon, but more specifically, like the horny fanboys that
Right.
because of her thing thought that they might have a chance with her or something, and that's what she said, that like it's just all these angry older fanboys that are upset because they're the chance that they thought they had with her is now off the table, which was never on the table to begin with, regardless of her sexuality. But I imagine seeing the type of people that would have come through table must have been an interesting mix of folks all across the board.
For sure. Yeah, I give her an awful lot of credit because I mean she's taken this character and run with just about as far as you can possibly go. I mean, there's been lots of horror hosts and hostess over the years, but most of them kind of have their Andy Warhol 15 minutes, and then
I could name two that I could name off the top of my head that are still around. I mean, like her and Joe Bob Briggs is the only two I can think of. And they have staying power for sure. Like the days of Vincent Price and those guys, like the House of Frightenstein and those other shows he's doing, that sort of stuff, like they're long gone.
Yeah,
but those two managed to hold on and endure right up till now.
Yeah, and I mean the product she's put out. I mean, she's had everything imaginable, from pocketbooks to trading cards to models to her own brand of beer, and just on and on.
I have a T-shirt in my drawer upstairs, so
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so she's reached all the way to the coast of Nova Scotia here. So
absolutely, but it was interesting though working on the comic because it was a lot of fun. Although, like I said, I wasn't super familiar with her. I wasn't an Elvira.
You don't need to be to draw it.
Yeah, I became one though.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to draw because I mean it was a humor comic, so that was good. In almost all cases, there were self-contained stories. So if you bought a random issue, you weren't getting part 8 of a 10-part storyline. And they were a little risque, but they were also, kids could read them. I mean, there was no sex in them or anything else. So I was going to say too, what happened also was after I'd been drawing it for a few years, I was a guest at the Chiller convention in New Jersey. And that was interesting because it was held in a hotel as opposed to one of these big, arenas. And so they were kind of like, you go through the hotel and you come to a room and there'd be a pocket of guests in one room, and then you go to the next room and there'd be another pocket of guests. So for the weekend, the room was Bill Stout and Bernie Wrightson and myself. And so I had the most recent Elvira finished. So I decided to take a cab, a very expensive, very long cab ride, to go see Richard Howell, the editor of Claypool. And so Janet came with me, and we went there and we talked for a bit, and then we went out and had lunch and stuff. And Janet started pitching him some ideas she had for some Elvira stories. And in the end, she ended up scripting Elvira stories for 6 years after that. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, writing stories for me, which of course was really convenient, and writing stories for the other artists, because there was a whole team of different artists working on the book.
Yeah, they had different stories within it, I think, right? It wasn't just was it all just one self-contained issue, or is there backup stories and stuff too?
Well, the regular issue was a 15-page lead story and an 8-page backup.
Right.
Most part, both stories were self-contained. Every once in a while you get a 2-part story, or sometimes the backup stories might be continued for 2 or 3 issues, but for the most part they were all self-contained.
So when did you and Jana meet, I guess would be another question, because at this point you guys are kind of actively working together. So
yeah, well, I moved up here to Ottawa to be with her, and that was 92. So it was the late 80s we actually met, and we sort of met through we met on the telephone first, because she used to be a writer for Amazing Heroes, and Amazing Heroes used to, the Fantagraphic.
I remember that. Yes, I remember that book. Yeah.
They used to do an annual, or maybe it was even twice a year, an issue where it was what's everybody working on and what's coming up in the future. And so she was assigned the Canadian beat, so she would phone all the Canadian artists and find out what they were working on, and then there would be some sort of preview in that issue of Amazing Heroes. So she was calling me all the time about that. And then her job, her full-time job at that point, would bring her to Toronto periodically to do press checks. So we would get together and just went on from there. So
Oh, nice. And it's still going. So
yeah, absolutely. So
awesome.
we still work on things together. We still, although her writing is mostly screenplays these days, but we still do something.
Well, I'd like to talk to her sometime too, if she's open to it.
Yeah.
I was when I was doing some research for this, I obviously stumbled across her as well, and she has a lot of interesting stuff to discuss as well.
There's actually a film coming out later this year. It's a feature called Galaxy Warriors, which is directed by Brett Kelly, who's sort of a king of B features. And Galaxy Warriors is kind of a retro sci-fi movie. And so Jana wrote the screenplay for that. And I penciled the movie poster, and Jeff Isherwood digitally painted it. So that's fun. And actually, Jana and I both have brief cameos in the film as well.
Oh, I'll be looking for that for sure.
Yeah. So
that's lovely.
Yeah. So
wow, very cool. So all right. So at this point, like Elvira was kind of overarching over 9 years. And you did various works through a few other things I see. I mean, was Vampira before Elvira, or is that something that came after?
Which one?
You worked on Vampira, right?
Yeah, that was a one shot. That actually, there was a guy called Kevin Sean Michaels, who was a documentary filmmaker, and he was doing a film about Mila Nurmi, who was Vampira. And so he did the final interview with her, and he also interviewed Cassandra Peterson and all sorts of other people for the film. And he commissioned me to draw this Vampira comic book, which was going to be reduced down to the size of a DVD sleeve, and it was gonna be inserted into all the DVDs.
Oh, okay.
And so he scripted it, I drew it, and he paid me, and for whatever reason, it was never published. I have no idea.
No. As an artist, did you find it like as an interesting, because I guess you did zines and stuff in the past, but I feel like, because I did some indie comics and stuff that I still do occasionally.
Right.
Do you find it tough to do your art in a way that's seen in such a small medium, like when it's can reduce to that small, or is that something you keep in mind when designing? Or
well, sometimes when I'm doing work that's being reproduced smaller, I'll draw smaller pages. When I did that Hell's Angels graphic novel, Lucifer's Sword, I drew that all in smaller pages because I knew it was going to be kind of that manga digest kind of size, so I thought there's no point in doing the larger pages. And plus, on that Hell's Angels book, I was under such a tight deadline that drawing the pages smaller was a faster way to draw the pages too.
What was that like? Because I mean, that was written by Hell's Angel, right?
Yeah. So Phil Cross.
Yeah.
Phil Cross is one of the original guys out there in California with Sonny Barger, the early 70s. One of the originals. Anyway, it was an interesting project. It came to me out of the blue. It was published by Motor Books, who have been around for decades and decades, and they publish books and magazines about cars and motorcycles and racing and all that sort of stuff. And I guess they decided comic books were hot and graphic novels were hot, so they were going to get in on it. So they actually talked to a mutual acquaintance who recommended me, and they contacted me and said, "Do you want to draw a graphic novel about Steve McQueen?" And I went, "Sure, that'd be great, sure." And then I hung up the phone and I went, "Oh man, it's drawing all those cars are just going to be horrible." Because I'm not a car guy for sure.
Yeah, you have to become one faster drawing Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
For sure.
So everything was on track. And then the next thing I know, they contacted me again and said, "We've changed our mind. We're going to have you draw this Hell's Angels graphic novel instead." And I thought, great. The only thing harder than drawing cars is motorcycles. But it was an interesting challenge.
I feel like a medium like comics. I'm not sure what the age range for that series was. I'm assuming it was probably not specifically for children. But because like the subject like Hell's Angels and their history is incredibly dark. So to translate that into a graphic novel story that pays, I guess it's supposed to capture sort of the feel of what that environment would have been like would be, I think, a difficult project.
it was real interesting, but I mean, the thing is, I mean, it was basically how Phil Cross joined the Hells Angels with, as I like to say, with all the names changed to protect the guilty.
Mm.
It was, you know, it was a huge challenge. It really was, and I had to pencil and ink a page every 36 hours. In order to meet the deadline. And the reason for that was the deadline. If I met there were 3 deadlines. If I met all 3 of my deadlines, then there was a very substantial bonus. And as a freelance artist, I wasn't going to let that get away from me.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah. So, but it meant literally I had to pencil and ink a page every 36 hours. And every time I got so exhausted that I took a day off, it meant that the next 2 days I'd have to pencil and ink a page each day in order to stay on deadline.
Yeah.
And it was funny because there were 3 separate deadlines. And as I was approaching the first deadline, I'm looking through and it was like you had to deliver, I don't know, it was like 23 pages or something for the first deadline. And I'm looking through the contract, sort of looking for a loophole.
Just feverishly looking, where can I find something to let me out of this?
Well, what I did find was it said I had to deliver 23 pages, but it didn't say I had to deliver 23 consecutive pages.
Oh.
So I had like 19 done. So I had like page 1 to 19 done. So then I'm looking through the script trying to find the easiest pages I can possibly draw. And so when I delivered the 23 pages, it was like page 1 to 19, and then page 23, and then page 42, and then page 66, whatever, And
did they call you on it? They didn't care?
Nobody said a word. So I'm like, great,
That's fantastic. All one-page spreads. Just just all the big ones.
Yeah. But it was interesting because they sent me tons and tons of motorcycle reference because they had it, because I mean they were motorcycle magazine publishers, so that was really helpful. Although I mean I'm not good with mechanical things, but I did my best. But it was really fun because I mean it was set in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s.
Easy Rider feel.
Yeah, so I mean I was trying to do stuff as much as possible that to remind you of the era, so it's like any opportunity there was, I'd put an on the wall, digital or on the wall dialed telephone, things like that, try and throw in little things all over the place, to remind you that it was the 1960s.
Just like a random movie poster for something that came out at that time.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. So, but it was interesting. I didn't have any direct contact with Phil Cross while I was working on it, except I would periodically, the editor would send me notes from Phil of something that wasn't technically right that I should change.
Mm-hmm.
And not big changes, just little tiny things. And I didn't have any direct contact with him until the whole project was finished. And I ended up doing a CBC radio interview, and I was here in Ottawa, and the CBC stations were here in Ottawa. But Phil, who was in not California, I can't remember which state he's in now. Anyway, he went to a local radio station and they patched him in. So we actually were able to talk to each other on the interview. So that was interesting.
Wow. That'd be a real interesting way to first meet someone that you've worked with for quite a while.
Yeah.
Well, no, that project seems so interesting to me just because, I mean, that world is obviously that they'd probably keep their cards pretty close to their chest. So the fact that he was even able to do that, I mean, I don't know who they answer to or the hierarchy of their system. Right. I really want to know, but the fact that he could, even reveal that much seems alarming to me that he's allowed. So that's super cool.
Like I say, we couldn't use the name Hell's Angels, and all the names were changed and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It was interesting though, because I mean, as I was working on, I was getting online, and searching out, visual reference, and it's like I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is a really fun project to work on, and then every once in a while you do some research, and up would pop like a newspaper item saying, 3 Hells Angels, in shootout at bar, kill 4 people, and you sort of go, whoa, where, this is a sober reminder of what this is all really about,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, do you find, as far as working on a project like that that's related to something that kind of would fall in a moral gray area, like problematic in any way, or is it just the work's the work?
Yeah, the work's the work. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I agree. I mean, obviously, it happened. Doing a story about it's not going to stop it from having happened.
Yeah.
And if anything, it's good to get those stories out there so people are aware of how these things come to be and perhaps can stop them from happening again. But that's very, very cool.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting for sure.
So I see you worked on the Savage Dragon TV show as well.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't a long running series. It only had a season, didn't there? Was it 1 or 2?
I think there was 2, but I only worked on the first season. Yeah.
So were you connected to Larson at all, or is that unrelated? It was the animation studio thing?
I gather he didn't like it very much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It seemed pretty far and removed. It seemed more like a straight superhero series from what I remember, because I watched it when I was a kid, but then the comic really seemed to be. Because the comic was obviously kind of subversive of the superhero genre a little bit, but the series just seemed kind of like your run-of-the-mill cartoon series.
I think so, yeah. But the comic book was quite funny, I thought.
Agreed.
Out of all those Image books, it was the one that I really liked the best. But it was funny because I got called by the animation studio, and they said, are you interested in working on an animated series about Savage Dragon? And I don't know why it didn't click. I just went, oh, they want to do an animated series about a dragon. Okay. And it wasn't until like the second or third conversation I had with them, I went, oh, Savage Dragon. Right. Oh.
Not a Savage Dragon,
That's
Savage
right.
Dragon.
The Savage Dragon. So it was fun to work on. Again, I mean, it's, it was working day and night, from the time I got up in the morning drawing until the time I went to bed, But the one thing that was interesting about it is they gave me a lot of she-dragon stuff to draw. And all of a sudden, my drawings of women got really good, really fast. So much so, this was prior to Elvira, so much so that all the books I kept getting offered for the longest time were female vampire comics. In fact, they're female lesbian vampire comics. One after the next.
You found your pocket. You're gonna sit in the female vampire lesbian vampire comic comic realm.
Carve out my own little niche.
That's right. Well, I guess if you got to be known as one particular type of guy, that's not a bad one to be.
I guess. And I did do a whole bunch of stuff. Draculina was one of them for sure, and there was fun stuff to do for a little while, but I had a bad run-in with a very unscrupulous publisher, and Elvira came along at the right moment and rescued a career of unscrupulous publishers publishing.
Yeah, well, I noticed that because a lot of your works have been some of old, like some fairly not massive comic companies, some smaller press places.
Oh, for sure.
So did you find it tough and to like people stiffen you on pay and deadlines and stuff like that as far as in the indies?
Oh, yeah, for sure. A lot. It happened far too many times, for sure. I mean, now I'm trying to be as cautious as possible, but it almost happened to me just a few years back with somebody that I decided to take a chance on, and it was the wrong chance.
Oh, that's rough.
The problem is because part of it is because I don't do superheroes. I'm not a Marvel DC guy, so I'm working on all these other sort of oddball kind of things, but I'm happy when I can work for somebody like Claypool, who was well established at the time, and were, very prompt with their paychecks. And even now with the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff I'm doing, it's like I know Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated isn't going to bounce a check on me,
Yeah, I think they probably got some deep pockets for sure.
I would think so.
Well, that's interesting too. We'll get to that in a second because I want to get to that. But was superhero comics ever something that was presented to you and you just passed, or was it just something you just never pursued and had any interest in?
I did samples, but they looked like they were drawn by a guy who could draw well that didn't draw superheroes, So they just looked awkward and stuff. So I never really pursued it,
Well, there's a level of dynamic poses and the sort of things that superheroes do that if your comics are kind of steeped in horror and realism, realism to an extent,
right?
Then it'd probably be a bit foreign to try to adopt that style if it's not something you're used to or even not interested in, really.
That's part of it, not being interested in. It's hard to fake enthusiasm, So
well, especially with your early love of like Kirby and stuff, because that stuff was so deep in that. Like, I'm a huge fan of Kirby's artwork, and I collect the big art books that have the scans of the full pages, and I have quite a few of his. And like just studying that stuff is amazing to me. The level of detail he would get, and how like, they talk about comics as being modern myths, and I don't think I've seen any other comic artist that has really captured the feel of like if someone had illustrated the Greek myths back in the day, like what it would feel like to look at now. And Kirby really always felt that way to me.
Mhm.
So okay, so I was a big fan of Fear Agent, which I know you worked on. How did that come about?
That was through Hillary Barda, because Hillary and I are friends, and was that the first thing? We worked on a bunch of things together, and I'm not even sure. Yeah, so I think he was writing a whole lot of backup stories for Fear Agent, so he asked me if I wanted to do one. So I was like, sure, because that was when I was in really the middle of my my being in love with Wally Wood phase, So, and of course,
it shows in your work on that. It really shows. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to make it as Wally Woodish as possible, and of course Hillary's 100% there with Wally Wood. So I mean, and I was specifically penciling the stuff, to tickle him. So yeah, that was a fun story to work on. I've actually got all the originals to that all framed and hanging in the hallway here in our house. So
yeah, it really that series in general. I mean, I like Rick Remender a lot. I assume he wasn't writing the series you're working on, but he, like, that comic was a real throwback to those pulp serial sci-fi things,
right?
And that Wally Wood style fits it so well. And it was I'm blanking on his name, Tony, the guy that did the art in the main book.
Tony Moore.
Tony Moore, yes, the guy that did Walking Dead originally.
Yeah.
Like his style was great, but yours really kind of just hit that cool little pocket of that type of sci-fi serial that I really enjoyed. It
was kind of EC-ish to begin with. The design of the stuff, the ship and the spacesuit and everything else, and then with Hillary working on it, I was gung-ho, so I'm a huge EC fan. So
that's been awesome. And then recently, of course, you're working on the Edgar Rice Burroughs, and we also worked on a series about soldiers, right? It was a
one shot. It was Victims of War.
Right.
That was actually published. That was a commissioned and published comic by a retired colonel, and it was basically about the victims of war. How it starts out, and it's about two guys that are friends, both in the military, that are married and have kids, and they both go off to Afghanistan, and only one returns. And it was sort of about the implications of what it does to various people's lives, so
kind of a modern day Deer Hunter.
It was very political. It was a challenge for me to draw. Everything's a challenge for me to draw.
I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, it's like drawing tanks and drawing stuff. Again, this goes back to with the Lucifer Sword as MC as well, which is, it's slightly terrifying to have to do a whole comic book full of motorcycles for an audience that is only being read by motorcycle enthusiasts. And with the Victims of War, I mean, it was a book about the military that 90% of the people who were reading it were all going to be military people, and so if you draw the wrong uniforms or the wrong vehicles or the wrong tanks or whatever, they're gonna know it immediately.
Yeah, I guess your audience is probably pretty keen on looking at that stuff, and that would certainly put you on edge. It would for me.
I
always find drawing guns difficult, like you close-ups of guns, so I always worry that like some gun enthusiast is going to call me on some terrible thing that I drew. Then the gun doesn't look exactly like this type of gun. It's like, I tried.
One thing I've got a huge box full of replica guns that are really handy, because
that would be handy.
Before they all became illegal. In fact, I got a whole lot of them at Eaton's several decades ago. And I mean, they're great because you can hold it in your hand and turn it to any angle, and draw it, so you're not relying on looking at photos online or looking at books and stuff. So
that's a fantastic idea. Cool. So before we get into the final stuff that you've been up to, I just like skimming through your stuff, and I don't want to just go through everything you did, but just here's a bullet point of every project you worked on. But you did a lot of work for courtroom sketches, which I see. And true crime television stuff, which I'm sure is similar, to courtroom sketch work.
Well, not really. The courtroom sketch thing is another thing that sort of came out of left field. Basically, what happened was Halloween was coming up. And so this is when I'm still drawing Elvira. So Halloween was coming up. So I decided to put together some packages, promo packages, and mail them out to various media people saying, Halloween's coming. You should do an article about the Elvira comic, meaning you should do an article about me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I mailed these all out, and I didn't get much response, but the one response I got was really odd. I got a phone call from the Ottawa Citizen saying, we saw your artwork. Have you ever done courtroom sketches? And I said, no. And I said, well, why don't you practice tonight when you're watching TV tonight? Just try doing some quick drawings off the TV screen to see how it goes. And I said, yes, I'll do that. Meaning, no, I'm not going to do that.
I mean, TV would be really tough because like everything is quick cuts. You're not going to get, at least when you're sitting in a courtroom, you can look at the guy for long enough to probably draw him.
Well, sort of. It was interesting because what happened was the very next morning, the Citizen called and said, are you available to do courtroom sketches today? So I went, sure, where, when, what do I do? And that led into, I guess, I'm not sure, it was 7 years. I think I was doing the sketches on a freelance basis. It was pretty wild, actually, because basically I'd be sitting at home and the phone would ring and they'd say, get down to courtroom number 3 right away. And so,
wow.
So I put on my suit, run upstairs, put on my suit because I felt if I wore a suit, I was in more incognito than just wearing regular clothes.
Yeah, that makes sense in a courtroom setting. Yeah,
that's it. And although actually it was funny because somebody came up to me once and tried to hire me as their lawyer.
Hey man, don't take no for an answer. Why not? Like, I don't have a law degree, but sure, why not? I'll give it a try.
I should have asked them for a deposit. And, but anyway, so I'd get down to the courthouse, and this is exactly how it went for 7 years. I get down to the courthouse. One of the writers would be there to meet me and would lead me to the courtroom and tell me the name of the guy that was being charged that I was supposed to be drawing, because these were all arraignments. Mm-hmm. And so I'd go in and sit there, and I'd sit there with a pencil in hand and paper in hand, waiting for the side door to open where they bring the prisoners out into the dock. And I'd be poised to draw, and as soon as the person would start coming in, I'd start drawing, and then they'd announce the name and it would be the wrong guy, so I'd stop, and the next guy, same thing. And the reason I had to do that was because some of these guys were in the courtroom for 60 seconds, and I had to get a good likeness of them. Because they'd come in, they'd tell them what their name was, they'd talk to both lawyers and assign the next court appearance, and out he'd go again. Wow. So, I mean, you're supposed to get a good likeness of this person in that amount of time. So, I mean, what I was doing was I'd sort of look at the person while I was scribbling on the paper, and as soon as they left, I would pack up my stuff with my head down. I wouldn't look at any other person. I'd walk out of the courtroom looking at the floor, find a corner somewhere and start, trying to draw them from memory. And when I'd see them in the person in the courtroom, I'd sort of go, okay, he's got hair like Clint Eastwood, and he's got a red shirt on, and stuff like that. And I'd make little notes and stuff. And then, like I say, go in a corner somewhere and do the drawing. When I originally started doing them, I had a deadline of 5 p.m. So I was able to go home and do the finished color work once I got home. Mm-hmm. But by the time, after 7 years when I finished, they actually would have a court photographer there outside waiting for me. And as soon as I finished doing the color rendering in the courthouse, I'd bring it out and they'd take a photograph of it and they'd digitally send it out to the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And it would be in the online version of the newspaper before I even got home. Oh my. Yeah. Wow.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah. There was a lot of pressure because, I mean, you're there, you only saw the guy for, a minute. Sometimes it was a few minutes, but, you had one shot at this, and wow. it was a lot of pressure.
I don't think I could handle it.
Because for the longest time, it's like you get up in the morning, go open up the front door, and the newspaper would be there, and there's your drawing on the front page.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
The day before, So that was.
You have any really high-profile cases, like anybody that was big?
The biggest one I did was Moman Kawaja, who was the first man in Canada that was charged and convicted with terrorism. And He's I believe still in prison. I imagine he's going to be there forever. But it was interesting because I drew him a number of times because they kept remanding his case from one date to the next date. And finally, I actually had to go to the Supreme Court one day. Wow. And that was because they were trying to get the case thrown out because it had taken so long. And that was sort of interesting because I went there, and I mean, normally anybody can walk into any courtroom. But at the Supreme Court, you go to the door, you have to knock, and I was greeted by an RCMP officer who opened the door, let me in, and I went and sat down, and he sat down right beside me, and I did my drawing, and when I was finished, I stood up to leave, and he stood up with me and walked me to the door and locked it behind me. So, yeah.
And any shades of your father there? Your little that level of police efficiency and stoicism.
It was funny though. There was some cases that were really strange. There were three men who were charged with arson, and basically what happened was there was a woman. Okay, there were three guys. One guy was a pedophile. And there was a woman who called the police to report that this guy was a pedophile. So in response, in the middle of the night, he threw a Molotov cocktail through her front window.
Holy crap.
And, it gets worse. So she woke up, she ran out of the house because she didn't have a telephone. She went to one of the neighbors, several of the neighbors, to wake them up until she got hold of somebody, called the fire department. She came running back to her home, and the front door was locked, and she had, I believe it was 2 children in the home, both of who died in the fire.
Oh, no.
No, so pretty horrible. So I had to draw these 3 guys together in court, and this was a case where I had as much time as I wanted to draw because this was the actual trial as opposed to arraignment. And so I started drawing the first guy. It was fine, no problem. I started drawing the second guy. There was no problem. Started drawing the third guy, which was the guy that was eventually convicted of pedophilia plus arson and
murder,
manslaughter, I guess.
Yeah.
He noticed that I was drawing him, so he started making faces at me. And the whole time I was trying to draw him, he was making faces at me and trying to get me to hold up my drawing so he could see it.
Oh God.
Yeah. So that was a really strange one for sure.
Especially a guy that is essentially a monster. You're just like looking at him, and just to have that much attention on you from somebody like that would be very off-putting and disturbing to him.
Well, I mean, he was behind bars, so that was fine by me. But
still, I guess, but just the proximity, I suppose, in a courtroom setting like that.
Yeah.
Even knowing they're just over there would be a powering emotional kind of event, I think.
Well, there were some really disturbing moments. There was one case I went to where it was a guy that had murdered a young woman basically for no reason whatsoever. He had stabbed her to death.
Oh my
and
God.
He had attacked other women as well. And I mean, so I'm at the trial again for this one, drawing various people. And at one point, the lawyer holds up in the air the knife that he had used. I mean, that was just kind of really disturbing, really bringing it home,
Yeah, I suppose most courtroom stuff just seems pretty mundane. It's but to be around for as long as you have, obviously would have had to sit in a lot of those things, which are really horrible events. And I suppose if they need pictures of them for the newspaper, they're probably noteworthy to begin with. But man, that would be crazy. You should that seems like a story in itself.
Yeah.
Or a book or a cool indie movie where it's just the story of one of these guys that draws these people in court.
Yeah. Well, I think the oddest moment I ever had was, I was getting pretty well known for doing them. Mm-hmm. And the other courtroom artists would come and sit beside me. And so we had somebody from the CBC and somebody from the Toronto Sun and what have you. And the oddest moment I ever had, this was an ongoing case. The artist came, sat down beside me, and she opened up her sketchbook, and she had already started her sketch. And it was a copy of one of my previous sketches of the same guy.
Oh, no.
She was using that as the basis of her own drawing. And that was very
Oh,
strange.
Wow. That's unfortunate. Wow, I like that the idea that there's like this weird little rivalry, but not that there was, but between courtroom sketch artists, like that sort of thing. It seems like one of those interesting little subcultures that you wouldn't think about until you see a documentary about it. And then you're like, oh, right, that's interesting.
Yeah, I found it really fascinating. It was extremely nerve-wracking.
Oh yeah, I could imagine the pressure. I wouldn't think I could do it.
Yeah. But I quite enjoyed it. I did it for 7 years, and then they just stopped calling me and started phoning somebody else. So that's funny.
Oh well, it sounds like a pretty good run.
Yeah, and it was actually quite funny too, because I didn't realize it till much later, but I was getting paid far in excess of what the other courtroom artists were getting, because I started doing the drawings, and it was for the Ottawa Citizen, and I suddenly realized that it was actually part of the I forget the name of the chain now, newspaper chain, but they had like 9 newspapers, and I think it was 13 TV stations. And so if I did a drawing, it could potentially run on all of those. And I said, wait a minute, you just told me I was drawing for the Citizen. So they offered me more money. So that was good. I got a raise there. And then later on, I actually asked for another raise, which they did give me. And then what I used to just copy my old invoices, right, and to make a new invoice.
Change the date,
change the date and stuff like that. But I was doing them by hand, and I actually put down the wrong amount on the invoice. I had increased it by, I don't know, it was like $75 or something, and it went through and nobody noticed and nobody said anything. So that was my new rate from then on. So by the time I finished, I was getting like more than double what I had started at.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, well, so that might have been a part of the reason they stopped using me too. Somebody
maybe
might have noticed.
You think the wealth of experience you'd have had of doing it for 9 years is something you wouldn't easily dismiss. I don't think so anyway, because I feel like you need a certain temerity and fortitude to be able to do that kind of output on that short of a notice to the left for 9 years. Like that's incredibly impressive to me.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So currently you're working on an adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Man-Eater. Is that
well, The Man-Eater's finished.
Oh, it's finished. Okay. That's one of your most recent projects though.
Yeah. The last, I don't know, 6 years, I guess, something like that. It's been the majority of the work I'm doing is all Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff. And so the weekly online Edgar Rice Burroughs website, they've got maybe up to 20 weekly comics going, Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and Pellucidar.
Well, yeah, I was curious because The Man-Eater is a fairly esoteric output from him. Like it's not one that a lot of people know about or one that's referenced a lot in mainstream culture at all, really.
Yeah, well, it was funny because the guy that was drawing Tarzan originally, Thomas Grinberg, I heard that he was leaving because Roy Thomas, who was writing it, offered it to a friend of mine. And the friend didn't want to do it, but he had told me about it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do a sample. So I sent the sample into Roy Thomas, and he kind of hemmed and hawed about it. He wasn't sure. He liked it, but he wasn't sure. And so I thought, okay, so I did another sample and sent it in to him. And he really liked it, but he wasn't sure. So I thought, I'm not going to spend all my time doing free samples, forget it. So of course they eventually found another artist, gave it to somebody else. And then I got mad at myself for not fighting harder for it. So I contacted the Burroughs guys again and said, have you got something else I can draw? And they said, what about the Man-Eater? And I went, great, perfect. And of course walked away and went, what the hell's the Man-Eater? I'll take it, what is it? And basically it was it's, as you say, it's not a novel that's well known, because Burroughs is known mostly for his series. There's like 26 Tarzan books and however many John Carter of Mars books and whatever. So the Man-Eater was originally serialized in the newspapers in 1915. I'm not sure the title of the newspaper offhand. And it's basically the story of a lion that's in Africa that's captured and brought back to the States and is sold to a circus and escapes and on and on and on, and in the end ends up in a animal reserve, preserve, what have you. So I started drawing it. Martin Powell was writing it, and Becca Kinsey was coloring it for me. And it was 150 episodes to adapt the novel. And it was a lot of fun to draw. Nobody asked me when I started, did I know how to draw lions?
I was going to say, how good are you draw lions?
The answer was no.
I can learn.
I can learn. So But there was a lot of fun stuff. I mean, there was two sort of noteworthy scenes. One which was they're bringing the lion back from Africa on a ship, and it's in the cargo hold. It's in a wooden cage, or no, sorry, it's a metal cage, and it's down there with all the rest of the bulk down there. And all of a sudden they hit a storm. It's these huge tidal waves, and it's raining, and it's, the ship is being tossed around. And of course, everything down in the hold is being thrown around too, and things are getting smashed, including the lion's cage. So the lion escapes and goes running up to the deck. And I mean, there's this tidal waves going on and the rain pouring, this lion running around on the deck, and these guys chasing after it with the rifles and nets and things. So that was really a fun thing to draw.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and the other scene was after it gets sold to the circus, it's on the circus train, and the circus train crashes out in the middle of nowhere. The cars all come off, and again the lion escapes, and it's the middle of winter, so it's like a snowstorm with the lion running around. Wow. So that was fun stuff.
So is this serialized in a public, like in a printed form as well, or is it just all digital?
No, it's just digital at the moment. I'm hoping that they will eventually print books. There was provisions in the contract regarding the books. This month, I believe, the first of the digital Burroughs comics is being published as a book. Dark Horse is bringing out a Tarzan book by Roy Thomas and Tom Grinberg, and I think they're bringing out another Tarzan book, because there's two different Tarzan newspaper strips or online strips. So
yeah, there seems to be a little bit of more interest in Tarzan lately, which is interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I noticed they just collected the Sergio Aragonés's Gru meets Tarzan comic.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I like the Conan one. I think I didn't get a chance to read that one yet, so I have to pick it up because I like Aragonés a lot. So
I like Aragonés, but I like Thomas Yates even more. Yates, one of my very favorite artists. I collect the Prince Valiant strips that he does. So
he's a Prince Valiant is the origins in Nova Scotia. I always perk up when I hear Prince Valiant.
Yes, exactly.
Hal Foster is from this area.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm in Truro. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Nova Scotia geography, but now it's right in the center. If Nova Scotia is the 7, where the inside of the 7 is, it's right there in that little hub. But it's about an hour from Halifax. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's kind of the middle point of Moncton, New Brunswick, and Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Right.
So, so what are you working on now?
Well, now, just as the Man-Eater was coming to an end, the guy that was drawing Carson of Venus decided to leave, and that was kind of like the golden ring. It's like I've wanted to draw Carson of Venus since 1972. When Kaluta was adapting it for DC Comics. And when they Ace Books, I guess it was, reissued all the pocket books, and I read them for the first time. And there was actually a fanzine called Media 5, and back in 72, 73, somewhere there, I did a whole page of different Carson drawings because I was so in love with the character. So the guy that was drawing it was leaving, and actually I have to back up. There was a guy drawing Carson of Venus, and he was leaving, so I did a bunch of samples, and before I submitted the samples, they'd actually hired somebody else. So I held on to the samples, and then when this guy left, then I immediately pounced and said, I've got samples, I want to draw Carson, So they gave it to me. So I've been drawing Carson for about 2 years now. Wow. I just finished strip number 79 today, the 79th one I've drawn, actually, although it's number 267 in the series. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
that's awesome. I love that there's still such a dedicated, I guess, Rice Burroughs had such an output back in the day, that there's still such a dedicated with his the group that's continuing to put in his work. I love that there's still such a dedication to his work, because sometimes, absolutely. I mean, as far as pulp novels go, he was one of the first, like him and Conan and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, for sure.
But I just love that there's still such a dedicated following, and that they can have these multiple digital comics that are doing well enough to keep putting them out. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think they're doing them to keep excitement about the Burroughs characters and things. Bringing out something new constantly. Like I said, the online strips that are new every week. So there's that. But I think it's also has something to do with protecting the copyright on these things.
That makes sense too. I never thought about that, but I think you're 100% right, because if it lapses in a certain amount of time for publishing, then it hits public domain, so they have to keep doing it to keep the rights under whatever contracts and deals they have. Because like Rice Burroughs has such a, I mean, beyond Tarzan and all that sort of stuff. I mean, Warlord of Mars, like that, they really tried hard to make that a new thing, and it really, the movie unfortunately did not do well. I don't think the title helped them. I think John Carter was a misfire, because it doesn't say much about what it is. And Warlord of Mars is such a more provocative title than just like a random dude's name, because I feel like, the first book was Princess of Mars, so they couldn't call it John Carter, Princess of Mars. Yeah, that's true. But even John Carter of Mars makes it sound like it's something.
Yeah.
And I know in the world we live in now, it's not like back in the day you just saw the title of a movie and that's all you had to go on. But now you get trailers and everything else, so it's all accessible online. But one movie that I feel is one that I'm a big movie guy too, is the last Tarzan film they did, The Legend of Tarzan, the one with. I think that's a fantastic movie, and not a lot of people have seen it. But it's like, if you like the sort of jungle adventure thing, I mean, Skarsgård's a great actor. You got Samuel Jackson in there, Christoph Waltz the villain. It's in the effects are I can't pronounce his name right, but Damon Hijanu or whatever, the guy from Guardians and some of the other Marvel stuff. It's like fantastic. It's a really, really good like classic action adventure kind of film, and I don't think enough people really appreciate how good that movie was.
Yeah, I liked that film a lot. I must admit, I wasn't super thrilled by John Carter. It just didn't seem to be hitting the right notes for me. But
yeah, I think that was them. I mean, Hollywood's always looking for a new Star Wars and a new franchise that can kick off, right? And that's what their attempt was. I think they tried too hard to make it something that appealed to everyone instead of making it something that was more truer to the source material. I mean, I understand it's in most circles that like people that appreciate it really like it, but it's just there's not a lot of them, unfortunately. So well, that's awesome. That's very, very cool. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me, Ron.
Oh, sure. Well, it was fun actually. Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Do you guys have children or?
No.
No, you managed to skip the children train, did you?
Absolutely.
I hear you. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm 36 now, and I've been married for 6 years almost, and we were together for 15. And
oh, cool.
No kids yet. I think that train is gone.
Yeah, but, never wanted children ever. So
yeah, I feel like you need to have a driving urge, and I never really had one. So
yeah, for me, I mean, a lot of different choices in my life were made thinking about how will this affect my career. I was going to have children. So I mean, many artists I've known over the years that have kids have given up their career. I mean, many still continue, but it's just kind of another one of those boomerangs that could get thrown in. So
yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like, you have to be prepared for that. I never was. I like my freedom, and not that I have anything against them. I love kids, but I just don't. I like to be able to come and go as I please. And I'm at that stage in life that all my friends are having them now. So, we're planning like pub crawls and fun stuff for people to do. And they're all like, well, we can't, we have a baby now. It's like, right. Have fun, But no, man, I can't, like I said, I love talking to Canadian creators that are out there doing the good work in the comics field. And I can't thank you enough for being on.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Oh, thank you, Ron. I appreciate it.
Okay. You'll let me know when this is appearing or where
it'll be this Saturday, but I'll drop you a link the morning it comes out.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'll promote it on Facebook then as soon as I know.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ron.
Okay, thanks.
All right, have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye, guy.
And there you have it, my discussion with Ronn Sutton. What a fun conversation, eh? There's a lot of stuff in there that I had no idea about. Like, I knew that he spent time as a courtroom sketch artist, but, having basically a monster sit across from you and make faces at you, trying to make you laugh and look at your image is chilling. I mean, it sounds kind of funny in like a black humor sort of way, but to sit there and look at this person who, I mean, obviously in a court of law, it's innocent until proven guilty, but someone that a lot of the evidence basically is pointing towards early on is a monster, to have him point his attention at you in any way would be chilling to me, and Ron did that for quite a while. So super interesting conversation. The stuff about the Comic-Con that he organized when he was younger, and paying a naked Ted Nugent was interesting. I really enjoyed all of that, and I was a big fan of the horror genre. His work with Elvira in that comic was super cool, and to learn some of the history of that, and also his time with Bernie Wrightson, man, super cool. I must say I was very happy to have that conversation and learned a lot about Ron, and I hope you did too. Join me again in 2 weeks' time where I have another guest. I believe it's going to be one Don Mann, who is a Comic-Con. I've been wanting to talk to someone that helps organize the Comic-Con for a while, and one of the newer ones on the beat out in my neck of the woods here in Atlantic, Canada, is the East Coast Comic Expo, which happens in Moncton. I've been a part of it every year. It's been a great time. It's very comic centric. There are others out here like HowCon and some others, but they really focus on sci-fi and fantasy. Not so much on the comic side of things, but the East Coast Comic Expo is created by comic fans for comic fans and featuring a variety of amazing comic artists. It is also organized by Nick Bradshaw, who is a friend, works for Marvel, and I hope to have him on the show someday. But in the meantime, Don is a great guy and has his hand in all of that Comic-Con planning, and I would very much like to sit down and talk with him about what that entails. And I think it'd be a very interesting conversation. So join me in 2 weeks' time when I speak with Don Mann, someone making waves here in the comic convention circuit in Atlantic, Canada. I think it's going to be a really good time. But in the meantime, enjoy your St. Patrick's Day. Curl up with a good comic early on before the drinking starts. And, maybe read about Banshee or some other Irish comic book characters, heroes or villains. There's quite a few out there. So, learn about them. Learn about all these great Irish characters. If you have Irish history, learn about that too. But in the meantime, stay safe, have fun, read comics, and I will see you next time.